Okay, so in this video we will be learning about React forms, and it is quite important because any front-end page will have forms where you have to input your name, your phone number, your email address, and that will have to be submitted and that will be stored for your information. So that will be very important as leads for companies. So that will be asked, and it can be interview questions as well because it's quite important. So let's learn about that first. Now before we head over to that, let me tell you an easier way. So just go here to file and open the folder that is practice app if you've closed Visual Studio Code. And then when you click on terminal or the new terminal, it directly opens in the practice app directory. So you don't have to CD it each time. Or in case you do open it in React apps, you can CD and open the directory practice app. So before we do that, let's clear up our index.js. And let's concentrate on forms here. So you can go ahead and delete this or save it as states in another file. But for now, I am just going to delete it and I'm going to let the rest of the things be. So first, let's start off with the small forms. Like, let's see how it is. Now, before we start our server, let's type the code and then start our server. Okay, so let's go here and give a name as name form or form name, anything is fine. So name form is equal to the form tag. F has to be capital. Oh, it doesn't have to. Sorry, that will be F has to be in a small letters. F has to be in not be in capital. Then let's give it a label. And the label will have name, and right after the label let's give it an input value and let it have a type of text. The input is a type of text, and let's give it a name as name. And right after this, it just goes like this because that's how Visual Studio Code understands HTML tags. But in React, it's just a tag which is quite simple. You just have to put an slash, backslash, and it's done. And right after this, let's give it another input. And let's close this. Obviously, it's going to close it like that, but this is not how you define an input tag in React. So this will be of type submit. Now let's put a submit button. So here we'll be putting our name, and then when we click submit, it gets submitted, the form gets submitted. But this is not going anywhere. This is just for practice, so we're not storing it anywhere. And the value for it will be submit. And similarly here it's backslash and close it. Now before we save it, let's change the render method, and what we'll be rendering is name form and not log because of the previous one. I hadn't removed it. We'll be rendering name form, and let's save this and start our server. Okay, the server is up and running. Let's just check in our Google Chrome, and now right here you see the name and its input type is text. So let's put a text right here. I hope you can see this. Let me make it a little big. And right here I'm going to say the name is John Doe, and when I submit this, nothing really happens because it's just an example, and it goes and gets stored here, right here. If you see name equals to John plus Doe, and it gets re-rendered. Now HTML form elements work a little bit differently from other DOM elements in React because form elements naturally keep some internal state. For example, in this form in plain HTML accepts a single name, so it has a state of its own. Now this form has the default HTML form behavior of browsing to a new page. Now when I click it, it has a default behavior of going to a new page. That's what happened right here. It's going to a new URL. It's a new page. But if you want this behavior in React, it just works. But in most cases, it's convenient to have a JavaScript function that handles the submission of the form and has access to the data that the user entered into the form. So we'll be creating a function, a JavaScript function that will handle the input into the form. The standard way to achieve this is with a technique called controlled components. Now, what is controlled components? In HTML form elements such as, let me just type it right here. In HTML form elements such as input, and there is one more thing called, I'll actually just comment this out. So there's input, there is text area. These are common examples of a form where we'll be using all of these in a form. So these are common examples, that is input, text area, and select. Typically maintain, so these three typically maintain their own state and update it based on user input, just like what happened here. In React, mutable state is typically kept in the state property. So as you know, these as I just said that they have their own state, but in React we have our own this.state object, if you remember. So mutable state is typically kept in the state property of components, and that can obviously be updated only with the set state method. Now we can combine the two by making the React state be the single source of truth, as in, now what I'm saying is input, text area, select, in form have their own state, but React has its own mutable state, right? We use this dot state in our constructor function, and we use set state to change the state, right? So we'll not use the inbuilt state of input, text area, and select HTML form, but we will make the React the single source of these inputs. Now then, the React component that renders a form also controls what happens in that form on subsequent user input. So then we'll give the complete control to React, and that will do whatever it wants, like send it to the backend or manipulate it or anything we want with a function. So that's what we're trying to do. An input form element whose value is controlled by React in this way is called a control component. It's as simple as that. For example, if we want to make the previous example log the same name when it's submitted, we can write the form as a control component. So let's go ahead and see what that is. We can now, let's just reduce this a bit, and you can remove the entire thing, because we will be giving the class component, and then let's render it. So that'll be class, let's call it name form, extends react.component. Let's give it a constructor with props and super with props. Now right after this, we were talking about giving the control to the React, right? Control to React. So we are going to introduce this dot state, and it has a value which is equal to null. It has nothing right now. We'll use this dot state to change the value once the user has inputted some value. Once the user gives some input, the value will change. So that is what we are trying to do. We are giving the control to React and not to the input or the text area or select itself. We are not giving control to this. We are giving control to React so that we can manipulate it and it will be faster. Now right after this, let's introduce the render. Yes, so let's render it. This has to be outside the constructor. So right outside the constructor, let's introduce the render function. And inside the render function, let's give it a return value. And inside of return, let's introduce the form. And here we'll be giving functions, as in methods, where it can manipulate. So form on submit is equal to this dot handle submit. Now let me explain this a little later, just as I finish the form. Now let's just put the label, and I'll give a name, say username, and an input. This will be right outside the label. Sorry, right inside the label will be input and another input for the buttons. So that will be input and so that way it doesn't create another one. Okay, so type is equal to text, and here we will be giving something as value and on change. Now but let me first finish this and then do that. So another input for the button, so type is, you guessed it, it will be button, and the value is submit. Okay, so now what we're trying to do is, when we input some type, we are going to access this dot state value right here. So the value will get stored to our state and the input will lose control over it, but React gains the control. That's what we're trying to do. Now value will nothing but be equal to this dot state dot value. Right now it's empty, but once the user gives an input that types his name, let's say John Doe, the value gets accessed right here and saves the name. And all this happens dynamically. On change, this dot handle change. Now what is happening right here? We have introduced two different methods and we are accessing the state value. So as I said earlier, we understood about value, that the value the person enters, the user enters, gets stored. Now what is on change? Now once the value has submitted the value, the name, it has to handle this change. It has to change the state, right? So the state is empty, the value is entered, but it hasn't been changed. To do that, we're using the handle change. Now how do we change state? What are we supposed to use? If you remember earlier, the way to change state is using this dot set state, and in that we'll be using handle change function to use this dot set state method. Let's see how to do that. And all these concepts are quite important because we'll be using all of these concepts in our coming up the first project. So please note down all of these carefully, and there's no semicolon right here because that is an object. And right after this dot set state, I'll come out of the constructor, and let us, if this is confusing, let's put it back to its place. So this is the constructor right here, the purple brackets, and right outside the constructor, let us introduce this dot, the handle submit method and handle change method. First, let's go to the handle change, where we will be changing the state value, and here we'll be giving event. Now this dot set state changes the value. Event dot target dot value. So what just happened right here? Now event is nothing but what the DOM sees. So there is an event happening. Now we can prevent the default that is basically re-rendering. Now the event that is going to happen now for the React application is the state value object. So event will target value and it will change the state. It's as simple as that. Now once the target, what is the target? So event is targeting value, right? So this dot state dot value, that is the value that is John Doe, is being given to our value which goes here, and the state gets changed. Now I will explain how it works, the cycle, but before the cycle I'm going to put another method that is handle submit. So let's give that. Let's handle the submit, and here also we'll be giving event as our argument, because event is what is going to happen and we have to prevent the default happening. So that will also be explained when we're doing the project, because these concepts will come again in our first project. Now alert, I'm going to alert it saying a name or a user has submitted his name, and or we can just say a name has been submitted, right? And we can give concatenate it and give the value, this dot state dot value. So what's happening here, we are accessing the value that is John Doe. So a name has been submitted, John Doe. That will be happening dynamically. I'm not giving it right now. So when I enter it there, it will show me its value. Now before we get there, so once this is done, I can explain how it works. Now cycle of setting the initial value from the state, propagating the changed value to the state, and then back to the input field. Now this, what does this mean is that the cycle of the setting of the initial value here, right here, from the state. So now I'm calling it from the state. Now this value is coming from here to here, and now there's a change. So it goes from here right to the handle change, that is here. The value gets changed to John Doe. Before it was empty, now it is John Doe, and then from here it goes back to here, and this process continues. It goes from here to here. Now it cannot go the other way around for any of these, because as we learned earlier that React is one-way data binding, so it can only be one way. It comes from here to here, and from here to this place, the this dot set state, that is the handle change method, and from there it changes the state value, because we're changing the state right here. And what is handle submit? Basically, when I submit the form, it handles it, and this is what I get as an output. Now let's go ahead, and before we save this, let us render name form. We have changed the name form to, okay, it's fine, but the class name has to be in capital letters. So name form will be capital. Let's save this, and we can go check it out. Nothing is showing up because we're in the wrong URL. Let's go to localhost 3000 and reload it. There still seems to be nothing rendered. Now that must be because it's not able to see our state. We have given the power to React, but it is not able to see the state. So I think it is not getting bound, so we're not using React hooks. So in React, the state value is not able to look into it. So since the value attribute is set on our form element, the displayed value will always be in the this.state.value, making React the source of truth. But since handle change runs on every stroke of update React, the displayed value will update as the user type. Now what happens is we have to bind it. It is not able to see it. So let's bind it. And how do we do it? So this, we have to do this each time we introduce a method into our form. So this dot handle change is equal to this dot handle change dot bind this. So we are binding it to the constructor right here. We're binding all this right here. Now it can see it, and it should probably work. So we have to do it to both the methods that we have introduced. So this dot handle submit is equal to this dot handle submit dot bind this. We can save this, and we should be seeing it right now. There must be some sort of an error. Okay, what is the mistake? Okay, it still doesn't come. Let's go see what our error is. Let's inspect it. I do make mistakes, not that I don't. It says functions are not valid as a React child. This may happen if you return a component instead. Oh, I am so sorry about this. Okay, so I should have called it as a component. Okay, now we should probably see it. Yes, now we see it. So username, submit, and let us submit the name. A name has been submitted. That's John Doe. Great. Okay, it's re-rendering as well. Okay, so here we need to prevent the default. Now let's prevent event dot prevent default. Once this has been done, that won't happen. Once we submit, okay, this has to be after the alert, or alert won't happen. Now let's save it now. So we can save this. This shouldn't be a problem. Let's make this smaller actually, because okay, so let's bring up this back. Okay, so once I've got it this side, I've just put it this side, and it makes it easier for you. And you might be wondering when I say John Doe and when I click on submit, it's not clearly working, but when I say enter, it's giving me my alert. There must be a small mistake, and if you have put button here, please change it to input and then save this. Sorry, it's not input, it will be submit. That's a small mistake there, and it's submit. It's submit, and once you put submit right here and save this, you can enter your name. You can click or enter, anything will be great, and you can say Mike, enter, or click it. It's going to work perfectly fine. Now let us talk about text area. Text area is another HTML tag. A text area uses a value attribute instead. This way a form using a text area can be written very similarly to a form that uses a single line input. Now it can be text area elements defines its text by its children, but we don't have to do that. We can just change the input. Instead of input, I can say text area, and up above I can give some in default value like please enter your name, and we can save this, and here it comes as please enter your name, and right after this will not go. You'll have to remove it on your own. Now let's call this as Mike, and we'll submit it, and name has been submitted, Mike. So we learned about input and we learned about text area. The last thing is that we're learning in this chapter would be the select tag. In HTML, select tag creates a drop down list. For example, the HTML creates a drop down list of like colors. Like we can go ahead and do that. So right after your, I'll make this big and we'll come back and look it up in our browser. But before that, so right here, after your label, you can say pick your favorite color, and we can pick our favorite color. So here we'll be changing it to select now, and this will all be the same. And right after this we can give it options, and it will be similar. There are no child, but there are child for this, not like the select. So for this, when I close option, there has to be a closing tag. It's not like how this was. So there is a child, and right in the children we can give a value saying black, And in the option tag we can give black as the value. You can give a few more options. You can give whichever your color, whichever is your favorite color. I'm gonna say blue, and right here I'm going to say blue. I'm just going to give it another one. I'll copy paste this. Let's say green for this. So we have three different options. You would have seen options in forms which you have submitted in your daily life. And let's save this. This will be green. We can save it now. And right after this, we have to close the select tag. And there are because there are many children. So basically, the select tag has children, and these are the children tags. But if you do not have a child tag, we can for input and text area there were no children, so you can close it that way. But for this you cannot. We need to close it like a normal HTML tag. And now if we save this, you can see the options you get. So pick your favorite color. I'm going to say blue, and when I submit it, it says a name has been submitted. We can change that right here. We can say your favorite color is, and I can go right here and say green, and when I submit it, it's going to say your favorite color is green. So from this, I hope you've learned a lot about forms, and there is a lot more about forms where we'll be learning about binding and everything, and we'll be using these concepts as well in our project. So I'll see you there, and I hope you understood all these concepts. Go through it again, and I will see you in the next video.